So hello, everybody. I'm Vance Lehmkuhl. I'm the director of the American Vegan Center and run the Veg History Tour program there. I invite everybody who's seeing this in person at the meeting or via Zoom to come on down to 17 North 2nd Street sometime soon and see what we have going on there, and specifically to sign up for a Veg History Tour. This is a thing that I've been working on for a while, and I continue to do research, and I've continued to do more research just for this talk that has informed how I give this tour. Um, so that's a large part of what brings me into this realm. I should point out that the American Vegan Center is a project of the American Vegan Society, which, as we said, Freya Dinshaw, who is the president of the American Vegan Society and pretty much co-founder. She's here as well. The American Vegan Society is the original U.S. vegan nonprofit organization. And they've done a lot of great things. And now we have this physical space right across from Christ Church on 2nd Street that people can visit. So that's who I am and why I'm here. And I'm going to try to go now. There we go. So this is a wider circle of care, the visionary ecology of early Quaker abolitionists. Um, so I'm going to be focusing largely on the life and work of Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet, who I hope neither one needs a lot of introduction to attendees here. I won't be talking about trying to say everything about them because there's too much stuff. I'm going to be talking about the things that I consider relevant, and of course, I should point out I am a vegan. I'm going to be um, obviously looking at this from a vegan perspective, uh, and I hope that you will take that in the spirit that it's meant. But hopefully, any arguments that I make, I'm going to provide historical data to back them up, and then you can evaluate whether you find it valid. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm a guest here in your house, so to speak, and I'm hoping not to cause any offense. I will be talking about how these two guys and some other people, how their work fit into how I understand the ideology of the Society of Friends. If I'm off, I apologize in advance for that. So I'm going to go on. So just going to start out by saying each of our lives is like a snapshot of all of life, right? We're limited by in space and time. Our life is constrained by our birth and death dates. We can't necessarily live outside that, and it's also where we happen to be at any given time, or we happen to be physically in the world. And so, what we can see and what we can understand is to some extent limited uh, by that. But there are people that we consider visionaries, and that's people that expand those boundaries and see the bigger picture outside of just their own boat, so to speak. And I do believe that Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet, certainly, and to a large extent Joshua Evans, fit that paradigm of a visionary. And I'm going to be kind of talking about how the work that they did and the perspective that they brought to things kind of fits into that. So we're going to start with Benjamin Lay. Again, hope people here are pretty much familiar with him. Don't have to go into all of his backstory. I wanted to acknowledge he was largely forgotten by mainstream society and even by a lot of historians until 2017, when Marcus Rediker published this biography. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was 6 months after that point that Abington Friends Meeting had a special ceremony to apologize to Benjamin Lay and dedicate a new grave marker to Benjamin and Sarah Lay, who were both buried at Abington Meeting in unmarked graves. And at that ceremony, there was also a Quaker meeting at part of that. And I sat in that meeting in silence as people talked, and some people, asked questions such as, if Benjamin were around today, are there things that he would want us to look at that we're not seeing? And I felt like I wanted to stand up and say, yes, you haven't said anything about the fact that he was vegetarian. Um, but I felt like I was, I was not a Quaker. I'm not a Quaker now. I was a guest there. Here I've been more invited to speak this, so I will try to bring some of that out. I don't think that, I mean, a lot of people think of his vegetarianism as one of a laundry list of quirks that Benjamin had, because he is certainly this quirky individual. And that same quirkiness, I think, that allowed people at the time, the regular bodied people, to kind of dismiss what he said because he was so small, he was hunchback, and he was extremist in a lot of ways. They could just kind of laugh off what he said. I do see that nowadays there is kind of people are embracing Benjamin Lay, but there's kind of an adorable quality to him because he's still like seen as this kind of cute little guy with these cute eccentricities. And I think that his message was actually very, very serious and very powerful. So I just want to push back against that a little bit. But I'm not beyond, cartooning and caricaturing Benjamin Lay myself. That was, our main image for the page for this was drawn from this image that I use on my tour. And I'm not going to go through all of Benjamin Lay's stunts, but as you probably know, he did various kind of guerrilla street theater activist events to try to shake his fellow Quakers out of their complacency about participating in slavery. This illustrates one of them where he had his naked foot stuck in a snowdrift next to the meeting house. And as the rich Quakers came in, they would say, Benjamin, get your foot out of the snow. You're going to catch your death of cold. He would say, you pretend compassion for me while your slaves work all winter long in the fields without adequate clothing. And, he probably said it in a little more intense voice than that. I have it as kind of a joke. He's reading How to Lose Friends and Influence People in this picture, but it is kind of making light of a very serious thing, because Benjamin Lay, to some extent, martyred himself for Quakerism, not literally dying, but it was one of the most important things in his life, his identity as a Quaker. And yet he knowingly got himself kicked out of successive meetings in trying to help the overall society to reform and to become more in accordance with its own professed values. So one other famous stunt was in Burlington in 1738. Benjamin walked from his cave in outside Abington over to Burlington because he would not travel by horse and carriage. As he said famously, I can walk. Why should the horses work for me? So he walked all the way there with this huge cloak on and carrying several things. He shows up at Philadelphia yearly meeting, which was in Burlington that year, in this cloak. And at one point he stands up in the cloak, and here are step-by-step how to get yourself kicked out of Philadelphia yearly meeting in Burlington. The second step, he throws off the cloak. He pulls out a book. He reaches in to his military uniform, which was hidden when he came in. And that's, as you know, just intentionally provocative. It's just about as provocative as you can be in a Quaker meeting. Pulls out the book and then pulls out a sword, a lethal weapon, in the middle of a Quaker meeting, and shouts that. And there are different versions of different people's recollections of exactly how he phrased this, but he was basically saying that uh, our participation in this violent institution was offensive to God and was going to lead to bloodshed. And he illustrated that by stabbing the book, having blood uh, spurt out of the other side of it. It was, of course, not blood, but pokeberry juice, but it certainly had its effect. And he, of course, then was immediately escorted from the meeting and did not resist. And so he did return to his cave and lived out, the last 20 years of his life, basically living right outside of Abington, off the grid. And this is where the whole ecology kind of thing comes in, because he really was somebody, he didn't have that word, he didn't have the word sustainable. Uh, Climate crisis was not something that was happening yet, really. And yet he tried to live in harmony with nature, in harmony with what he was professing. So he grew his own food, he ate vegetarian, he had a garden, he grew his own food, he even grew flax, which he spun into linen to make his own clothes because he wouldn't wear wool, he wouldn't wear leather. He was way ahead of the time in refusing to participate in the consumption of products that he knew came directly from oppressive systems. So he would not drink rum. He avoided sugar because those all came directly out of the slave trade. He would go to somebody's house who invited him to eat, and then a person would come out, a person of color would come out to serve him, and Benjamin Lay, uh, might say, "Excuse me, is your servant enslaved or not?" And they would say, "Yes, we consider them as part of our family, but yes, they're." And Benjamin Lay would say, "Sayonara." Well, he probably didn't say sayonara, but you get the idea. So he was really, we didn't have the word boycott for another 150 years, but he was one of the people that really was out in front on that. And his agitation did, uh, people, said it was just too provocative, too outrageous, too this, too that. But it did have an effect, and it certainly influenced a generation, a younger generation of Quakers. Um, in 1737, he published this book, All Slave Keepers that keep the innocent in bondage, apostates, and the title goes on. That's the title that we're looking at there. I'm not going to read the whole title. I hope people are familiar with this book. It's an amazing work. It's amazing polemic that he was trying to get his ideas across. He was not a talented writer in terms of organizing his thoughts. So the book is very disorganized. It's more organized probably than the way that he delivered it to Ben Franklin and asked Ben Franklin to put it in some kind of logical order that would make sense. But it has a lot of real gems in it. And one of the things that led me to kind of the research um, that I'm going to be bringing forward was this passage where he says, "I never read in History of the Waldenses, our first reformers from popery, that they kept any slaves. I have understood that they were very temperate, not eating flesh, milk, or egg." So just in that sentence, in this whole book, he's talking about how evil uh, human slavery is. But here he is making the point that there is an overlap of congruence between being very temperate in your diet and what you will participate in terms of what you eat, and refusing to participate in human slavery. And he goes on doing kind of his own little veg history tour here, talking about famous figures from the Bible, talking about John's locusts and wild honey, John the Baptist, famously eating locusts, supposedly, which some historians now say that may very well have been the locust bean, which was what they called carob. So I'm hoping that Freya knows that, or I think our leading carob advocate here today. Um, Daniel and his three friends who asked to be fed just on pulse and water and wound up stronger than the people who were holding them. Israel's 40 years eating manna, a vegan product. And I think, he says, James, our Lord's brother, according to Josephus, ate no flesh. There's actually much more evidence than just Josephus that James was, in fact, vegetarian. And many thousands more, I believe, good men and women. And I'm going to just pause there to note that he's in this paragraph saying this concept of refusing to oppress animals and choosing to eat in a way that where you opt out of that is not singular to him. It's something that we can find examples of all over the place. And of course, he was limiting himself to biblical references. He was, very pious and very much invested in that world, but he was also very well read, and he probably knew other examples that he didn't use because he was talking specifically to Quakers and making a religious argument about that. And the interesting thing is that this is the first time I ever heard of the Waldenses, who were also called the Waldensians, um, and they're in a very interesting group. They were definitely really the first Protestants. They started the Protestant Reformation 300 years before Martin Luther. Um, but I have not yet found any evidence that the Waldensians as a whole were essentially vegan, as he describes here. And an interesting thing is that at the end of this paragraph, he says, many thousand more, I believe, good men, which is exactly what a different group, the Cathars, called themselves, as with most of these groups, including Quakers who now call themselves Quakers, but they did not choose the name Cathars. Waldensians did not choose the name Waldensian. Um, Cathars called themselves the good men. Um, and Benjamin Lay, of course, being, remember, this is still in the early 18th century, somebody who did not want to be sexist, added, and women. But I'm wondering whether he was mixing up the Waldensians and the Cathars, or whether his source that he read had them mixed up, and that's very possible. Interestingly, he cites William Penn in the book No Cross, No Crown for mentioning the Waldenses with great esteem. And so I went and looked up that passage to see if Penn indicates that that they were vegetarian or vegan, and he doesn't. But by his description, it does seem that it's very possible that was part of it. He says they come positively to deny the praying for more than is requisite for outward necessities, or that it is lawful to use more, condemning all superfluity and excess out of fashion, pride, or wantonness, not only of bread, but all outward things. And then he says they conclude with an ancient father of the primitive church, James, after this manner, that costly apparel and superfluity in diet weaken the spirit, as well as other things. So I think that's interesting, not just in terms of the Waldensians as potential vegetarians, but they certainly had this outlook that we would now call sustainable. They were looking to not uh, have their own snapshot of life expand in terms of its causation to a greater degree than it deserved to. Whereas today, I think a lot of the crisis that we face is that people don't they don't worry about looking outside their snapshot to see how what is being caused by outside that. Whereas the Waldensians were at least doing that. And so the question of the Waldensians versus the Cathars, I'm just going to go into that very briefly. This is a very, very simplified map. But both the Waldensians and the Cathars started in southern France, what's now southern France, and there was much more overlap geographically than I pictured here. But I just tried to get this concept of these two populations. They had a lot of differences ideologically, but people did tend to confuse them and lump them together a lot of the time. And they started there, and I kind of used the arrows to show how they kind of expanded out into Eastern Europe. And the interesting thing is that they were also both, the Waldensians again were very much what we would now call Protestants, and they objected to the way that the Catholic Church was a lot of the things that Martin Luther would later object to, and said that they could not take seriously, the word of God coming through these people who were living in luxury and doing other things that they didn't consider moral. They also rejected the concept of the church telling them when they could eat meat or not eat meat. And so there's one connection there. The Cathars were a vegetarian group. They were that was a central part of their religion, and in fact, the inner circle, the perfected, the elite of the Cathars strove to eat vegan, strove to eat without any animal products whatsoever. These were both huge populations that most people today are completely unaware of. And interestingly, they were, as you might expect, the Catholic Church didn't take very kindly to these people making all these critiques and gathering followers who opposed the Catholic Church and responded with violence. And in fact, the Cathars, the church considered such a big problem that they came up with a project to identify and wipe out the Cathars. And that project was called the Inquisition. And that was largely successful. They basically wiped out the Cathars. A few scattered individuals may have gone underground. They also tried to wipe out the Waldensians, who also went kind of underground. They just kept a little lower profile and kept on traveling and spreading to different places until they were finally, when Protestantism came along, Waldensians were kind of absorbed into that whole thing. But at the same time, a new group arose that I have not found any vegetarian, specifically vegetarian aspect to, but that's the Huguenots. And the interesting thing about this, they were also very much persecuted by the Catholic Church as Protestants. And once France became a Catholic country, they were persecuted to the point of having to leave the country or be killed. And one key family who was hounded out of France by, the governmental authorities because of their Huguenot religion, wound up going first to Rotterdam, then spending some years in London, and then coming to Philadelphia. Was the family of Anthony Benezet. And so Anthony Benezet had left France as a 2-year-old. Grew up mostly in London, and he came to Philadelphia as an 18-year-old. But he had this background as a refugee. And I think that really gave him a leg up in being able to see beyond his own snapshot of life in much the way that Benjamin Lay, I think, was able to, because being a little person, he was also persecuted. He spent basically every day as an underdog, literally. And so, well, not, he wasn't literally a dog, sorry. He was literally under, though. And he was then able to take that, and instead of just being angry about it, he was able to see how the perspective of other persecuted groups and other oppressed groups. And I think that also applies to Anthony Benezet. So Anthony Benezet, inspired by Benjamin Lay, started seriously working on expanding this concept of abolishing slavery, first throughout the Society of Friends. Anthony Benezet conceived, proposed, and wrote the Epistle of 1754, which was the point at which the Philadelphia monthly meeting put on record that Quakers discouraged their members from owning slaves or participating in the slave trade. 4 years later, Anthony Benezet was very instrumental in getting the rule change where the Quakers actually said any Quaker who participates in the slave trade will be disowned. And so then later on in 1776, the Quakers actually did achieve that. But Anthony Benezet did not simply concentrate on the Quakers. He expanded this whole thing, again, outside his own snapshot, to a much wider movement. He could see that it wasn't just a case of these individuals participating in oppressing other individuals. It was part of this whole movement. He could see that this was all being driven from Great Britain. And so he worked on trying to get Great Britain to divest itself from the slave trade. He inspired Granville Sharp, worked with Granville Sharp, corresponded with Granville Sharp. He also later inspired Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce, who became the three pillars of opposition to Great Britain's participation in the slave trade, and who eventually got that to happen, got that divesting to happen in 1808. And when they would be standing up and in Parliament trying to get these bills passed that would take Great Britain out of that, they would often be reading from sources that Anthony Benezet had sent them, or from the works of Anthony Benezet himself, because Benezet had already started by this time writing articles and books that were trying to get people to see this bigger picture that he could see. And specifically, in a couple of his books, he started talking about life in Africa, and especially the way that the Europeans were destroying Africa by coming in, starting wars so that they could generate prisoners of war that could then be sold and brought to North America. And so, I mean, North America and including the West Indies and the different islands and so forth. So really, he was somebody who I think really exemplifies this. And again, Benezet, he had this vegetarian commitment that was more than just about his wanting to eat healthy or not liking the taste of meat or anything else. He fit this into what Donald Brooks Kelly calls a moral ecology. So for Benezet, his outlook on the world and trying not to live in a way that where you would cause greater suffering or negative impact than you could, legitimately be responsible for in a deserving way. He really made that into something that was a holistic approach to both individual concerns, humans' relationship with other humans, and humans' relationship with animals. Benezet did not simply concentrate on trying to overthrow the institution of slavery. He also worked on Native American concerns. He also worked to help the Acadians. He helped basically everybody who he could perceive was in a bad situation that needed help. But in terms of the Indians, this is a great example to me of how for Benezet this holistic equation kind of worked. This is a letter that he wrote to Sir Geoffrey Amherst at the end of the French and Indian War um, about this problem with the Indians, and Benezet identified the problem that European colonists kept on spreading out and taking more land through one way or another, uh, often through chicanery, such as William Penn's sons with the walking purchase, sometimes legitimately through trade, but other times through violence. And Benezet literally suggested that white people could securely settle, though perhaps in a more compact manner, upon those lands already purchased, essentially saying we should be happy with what we've got and stop sprawling in causing these conflicts by trying to take over this land. And of course, he's speaking specifically about the native inhabitants of North America, who are humans. But of course, European colonists were also doing this with free living animals in North America and bringing from overseas domesticated animals that helped accomplish both of these projects of destroying Indian Native American culture and also destroying a lot of wild populations. And Benezet was able to see this solution that we're now that we have this, kind of global crisis staring us in the face, we're starting to say, oh, it might be a good idea not to just create a parking lot of everything in the world, but having actually rewilding places and trying to keep those carbon sinks going. So obviously Benezet did not have that terminology or the science, but he was visionary, I think, in that way. So that's one example. I also wanted to point out I've read a lot of people saying near the end of his life, Benezet went vegetarian. This is 25 years before the end of his life. He's writing to John Smith in Burlington, who is a good friend of his, and he's being invited to this uh, festival or dinner or whatever where a goose is going to be killed, and Benezet makes it clear that he wants no part of that. He is not going to be help kill the goose or have any of it. And he says, I shall scarce ever imbrue my hands in the blood of any creature, having left off eating meat, as abstinence conduces to my health. Abstinence, not just moderation or temperance, but abstinence. And made a kind of league of amity and peace with the animal creation. He continues, looking upon animals as the most grateful as well as the most reasonable part of God's creatures. And then he adds, with the exception of some honest Burlington Quakers, because, John Smith was a Burlington Quaker, as though he realized that what he was saying was that all animals were more reasonable, more grateful than all humans. And he kind of was dialing that back, a very witty way, like not you, of course. But yeah, I mean, so that's just gives an insight into how Benezet's vegetarianism was, again, coming from this very deep moral sense. And there's some interesting passages in the Pennsylvania Spelling Book that he originally wrote in 1778. This is an edition from 1782, so I don't know if it was in the 1778 version, but it was shortly thereafter. This is in a section of the book where obviously this is a book for kids to uh, copy down words and learn to spell words. He has, spelling list of words and goes into how they're syllabicated, how different words are built, and how you can remember how to spell them. But he also has little passages of for young people for young children to just use very simple 3 and 4 letter words to copy out these texts. And all the texts, are coming from a very moral and Christian perspective. And a lot of them, have kind of standard pious messages. Um, but among those, he has messages like this, that he who made us made the bird and fish. He who made them loves to do them good. Bird and fish can feel pain, even as we do. So be sure that thou hurt them not in thy play. So he's, telling little boys principally to not go out and do things that will hurt animals, which many children would do otherwise. Well, many boys anyway, because the way the boys are socialized. Um, but I think it's very interesting that Benezet very clearly is telling children, is taking upon himself to tell children that birds and especially that fish can feel pain, which is something that even today in mainstream society, there are people still clinging to this notion that fish don't feel pain, even though now we have a raft of scientific studies proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that fish feel pain. Benezet did not have those, but he had this kind of vision where he could just see what was right in front of his eyes. And because he was not invested in eating them, he was able to just take in that information as it was and draw the logical conclusion from it. So, in a later part of the book, which is for older children, and it has more complicated words, he has 3 passages having to do with being kind to animals. 2 of them are bylined, and the third one is not bylined, which indicates, I think, that it is coming directly from Benezet. And this one is pretty interesting. It goes, why didst thou murder yonder harmless fly? Because 'tis good for nothing, dost thou cry. The same of thee, though now so vain and gay, as justly might superior beings say. And yet thou livest to form this impious thought and set thy maker's handiwork at naught. Which is just, it's an amazing thing that he's, first of all, writing this passage to try to be sure that there are exactly enough difficult words in it for people to learn spelling while they're copying it down. Um, Also making it rhyme, but also delivering this message that I haven't really found many other people from the Revolutionary era who would say you should not kill a fly. You just their life is still worth something. And that really ties in for me with the problem of a lot of meat eaters that they have to deny the worth of animals' lives. They can't just say, if our life is worth X amount, then that of a chicken, let's say it's worth 10% of that. It's worth 10% of X, because in their life, they know very well that they've eaten more than the equivalent of 10 chickens. So that 11th chicken that they eat automatically puts them in an ethical imbalance. They're automatically, by their own calculation of worth, they're definitely, straying. They're trespassing. They're doing something beyond what they themselves would consider a moral equation. And so the common concept in mainstream society is that animals that are raised for food, their lives are worthless. They are worth zero. They have to be worth zero because you can multiply zero by any number of things and you still get zero. And then you can feel like, I'm not doing wrong because this is fine. Their lives are worthless. Anthony Benezet back then is telling children not to make that error. So that really, to me, is pretty visionary. So Anthony Benezet, I think, had a big influence on Joshua Evans, um, and especially in conveying that the opposition to war and the opposition to violence against animals and the oppression of animals were something that fit together. And Joshua Evans articulates that pretty nicely here in this passage, which I'll just point out. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but saying that there is a progress of a spirit of cruelty that starts with animals and goes up to war. And this is something that Tolstoy later said, and that Pythagoras had said earlier. But it's something that he is making this point that the Quakers, with their opposition to war, he's implicitly saying that it makes sense then to oppose participation in this, and so at least it made sense for him. So he was an ethical vegetarian also, and he's expressing again, there's something that is perhaps latent in Quaker ideology that I think there may be more of it than a lot of people appreciate. I'm just going to mention this article, which I don't remember the name of the article. It was an interlibrary loan book that I had to get back, but it was about the history of how George Fox started the Society of Friends and what his influences were, and various commentators are brought in with what they ascribed as some of the roots that he was drawing on ideologically. And these are the people. I'm not going to name all the people. I just want to give their full names here. You can go back and look at them later. But the point is that I wanted to kind of show how some of these influences seem to be pointing in a certain direction. And so this, now, I don't know how you have your Zoom screen, but my screen has my sharing thing blocking the word George Fox at the top of the screen. So if you can't see that, move whatever's blocking it. But so this is obviously depicting some roots of a tree. It's a very simplified diagram again. I'm not showing all the roots. I'm not showing all of the influences that these people mentioned, because a lot of them I didn't recognize. And so they may fit in with these others or they may not, but I did not have time to go and research every group mentioned. But some of them I recognized that, oh, that's interesting. So this is just going to show those ones that I've found the most interesting and the people who ascribe them. So most of these have multiple commentators pointing to these as influences. The Waldenses, the Cathars, which are also called the Albigenses, Jacob Boehm, the Essenes, the Neoplatonists, the Corinthian troublemakers, and primitive Christianity. So I'm going to now take away the commentators just so we can look at that. And the Waldenses, as we've already said, we don't know for sure. Unless somebody here knows, you can chime in the Q&A. But we know that they were anti-luxury. They were against living beyond, not just beyond your means, but beyond your sphere. We do know that the Cathars were vegetarian and or vegan. Jacob Böhm is an interesting case. He definitely said some things that were anti-meat. He said that meat eating was a damnific practice that hid the pearl of wisdom, that clouded our vision and hid the pearl of wisdom from mankind. But he does not seem to ever have followed that up by going vegetarian himself, which is common with a lot of philosophers that they would identify. Yeah, this is a problem, but they were not. They did not have enough will to follow up on it themselves. The Essenes, we know, were a vegetarian sect. And the Neoplatonists is a word that people use for a group of philosophers who were largely vegetarian. They overlapped greatly with what are called the Neo-Pythagoreans. Pythagoras, of course, being the poster child historically for vegetarianism. So Plato himself was influenced by Pythagoras, and in several points he has Socrates make arguments that we would recognize today as vegetarian. One of the key arguments that I think bears on what we're talking about today, and also connects with that suggestion of Benezet of living in a more compact manner. Socrates in the Republic describes the ideal city-state and shows how it all fits together and works harmoniously. And his student says, "Hey, you left out one thing with people. What about meat and cheese? You know, you have us, eating like pigs here and living on nuts and berries. And so, what are the people who really are saying that people are going to live like that?" And Socrates says, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So you want to have meat and cheese for people. So now we have to take this land that we had dedicated to growing crops. So we just have to expand that a little bit because we're now going to need more crops to feed these animals that you're growing. But our neighbor also wants that. So they're going to have to expand theirs. So now you have this border conflict, and now you have essentially the roots of war. So I think that's another interesting connection. The Corinthian troublemakers is a weird thing that Paul talks about. These troublemakers that the Corinthians are following, they may well have been the Jewish Christians. Uh, and so we're just going to leave that open. But the Jewish Christians really are the ones led by James, the first leader of the Jewish Christians. They are the ones that really deserve the mantle of being called primitive or apostolic Christianity. When people talk about apostolic Christianity, a lot of times the apostle that they're talking about is James. So I'm going to go ahead and say veg slash vegan for them. And that includes Jesus. And if this is a shocking or offensive thing to you, I will entertain arguments to the contrary, but I ask that before making such an argument, you be sure that you read the book Disciples by Keith Akers, who assembles just a really compelling amount of historical data and historical references, not just from the New Testament, but from very early commentators, people who were contemporaneous, to suggest that a group called the Ebionites or the Ebionites, I've never heard other people say it out loud, is the group that the Jewish Christians uh, were part of, and in fact, the group that Jesus was the leader of, and that John the Baptist may have been the founder of. But a key aspect of their ideology was that they did not eat meat, they did not drink wine, they were against sacrificing animals, which Jesus in the gospel certainly was, since he wound up getting himself arrested and crucified for the act of disrupting the animal sacrifice business at the temple. Um, they refused to do oaths. They were pacifists. They intentionally lived as simply as possible and devoted themselves to helping the poor. I think you might see some of these aspects as relevant to modern Quakerism. So a contemporary of George Fox, Edward Burrow, who wound up getting killed for being a Quaker essentially at age 29, he wrote things that were extremely verbose. So I had an original slide where it basically was like 1,000 words. I'm just going to mention that he described the fall as involving the seeing of animals as things to be used and abused, and that was what took us out of that Edenic state, the state of being in grace with God. And this person who was writing about him, Howard Brinton, in the article Quakers and Animals, summarizes this by saying, "Thus mankind had no clear conception of nature and its harmony, but the man who is restored, the spiritual Christian, has a new and clear vision which leads him to see the creatures as they really are and to treat them as they should be treated." And so this concept of restoring this Edenic condition was very much present in early Quakerism, especially in the US and especially in Pennsylvania. And Joshua Evans, for example, cites Isaiah, the famous peaceable kingdom section of Isaiah, saying wolves and lambs will eat together in peace. They will not hurt or destroy each other. And Brenton comments that Evans cited Eden in the words of Isaiah, saying that Christ came to restore that Edenic condition, which would make sense if you believe that Christ I mean, it would make sense within this system if you believe that Christ himself objected to the oppression of animals. And so this goes even further with the actual founding of Philadelphia. You have this famous painting by Edward Hicks. He did a couple different, few different versions of this. Is I think the most famous version of his painting, Peaceable Kingdom, where he depicts very clearly in the foreground all the animals living together in peace and harmony, and then in the background of that, very tellingly puts William Penn making his treaty with the Indians to found Pennsylvania. So to some extent, Philadelphia, the land of the cheesesteak, the namesake of Philadelphia cream cheese, does have perhaps some vegetarian threads that go back to its very founding. Of course, William Penn himself was not a vegetarian, but he was part of this early Quaker movement. And from the get-go, as the Society of Friends was created, it was defined as being notable for not wanting to be extremely cruel to animals. George Fox himself and Edward Burrough and other early Quakers specifically spoke out against sport hunting. They did not believe in sport hunting or falconry, anything where you were doing something violent to animals when there was no need. And they defined those needs. So, self-defense. If an animal is attacking you, you have to remember that back in these early days, there were still a lot of wild animals around North America. There were predators still, which we basically managed to destroy, but there was more of a concern than we have now in the Philadelphia area with a wild animal attacking you. If you have to kill that animal, sure, that's 100% justified. But sport hunting is sport fishing, just for the heck of it. There is no need, and they did not include that within the concept. The eating of animals was considered fine by Quakerism as a whole, by that ideology, because there was a need. It was seen to eat animals in order to get proper nourishment. This was in 1652, and you had very little dependable science, even though by that point there had already been, as we've seen, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the West alone who had lived out their lives as vegetarians. But there really wasn't scientific evidence. Well, in 2024, we now have evidence that there is literally no need to kill animals for food. The American Dietetic Association, which is now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, has gone on record saying that vegan diets are healthful and nutritionally adequate. And in fact, it goes beyond that, because there is now, I would say, a need not to kill. And there's various charts showing how different food sources impact the environment. This is just one. This is just greenhouse gas emissions, which is, the key driver of the climate crisis. And as you'll note, the animal foods, I've drawn a little line there, that animal foods are all on one side of this line, and the non-animal foods, I have something that, there it is. The non-animal foods are the ones that do the least, cause the least emission. So, I don't want to put it in terms of sinning or not sinning, because I would not even necessarily call myself a Christian. But I do think that however you look at it, when you're choosing what to eat, you can choose to eat something that you are saying, I want to eat something that's going to drive us closer to extinction. Or you could say, I'm going to try to eat something that is going to help support life, not just our life, but all life on the planet. And obviously, that's a decision that everybody has to make. Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet made that decision for their own lives. And again, that for them was an expression of their, what Donald Brooks Kelly calls the moral ecology, this kind of holistic view of the individual and their place in the world. And they acted on that, in what I think I could call revolutionary peace. They're acting on that ideology really ties in with the statement from James that faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. If you don't do something with your faith to manifest it in the world, it doesn't matter at all. And so, just back to that snapshot. Whatever you take away from this, I'm hoping that people have at least been entertained, um, but that you'll keep in mind some of these things. And, as you go through your life, think about how what you're doing and the choices that you're making do actually affect and are part of a wider picture, a bigger picture, a wider circle of care. And it is possible. We're not all going to be an Anthony Benezet or a Benjamin Lay or even a Joshua Evans or even a John Woolman, but we can try to see outside that snapshot and see things that they may be uncomfortable, and they make us feel that we need to do something about how we live and actually see a much wider picture. And to if we carry that forward logically, uh, we may get to the point where our snapshot winds up taking in the whole world. And that is my presentation for today, and I thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much, Vance. I guess we have time for some Q&A, and if there's anybody, yeah, Bert, yeah, here.
That's the only one.
There's stat over there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your great talk. It's very inspiring.
Sorry, it went on much longer than I had thought.
You
Sorry.
covered a lot of important bases, some of which I had not heard of before, and one that interests me was talking about the day after. I think it was the day after Palm Sunday, Jesus goes to the temple. I'd always heard that as characterized as the money changers.
Right.
How is it that that figures into the animal for food industry?
Well, without going too much into it, the entire concept of animal sacrifice as it arose in ancient history, um, there's indications that that arose not simply out of a desire to be pious and to show your gratefulness to God, but as an excuse for people to eat animals that they otherwise would not have. And so by the time Jesus shows up in the temple in Jerusalem was essentially a slaughterhouse. It was a religious slaughterhouse. But it was a place where animals went in to be slaughtered. And because it was this particular time of year around Passover, there were many pilgrims who would come to the temple from far away to have an animal sacrificed so they could get, God's favor out of it. But because a lot of them were coming from far away, they couldn't necessarily bring their animals all the way there with them. So there were a lot of animals being sold right outside the temple. And the money changers and money lenders, the money that was being transacted, people weren't going to the temple saying, I need to buy a house. Can you loan me some money? They were going, buying and selling animals to take inside the temple to be slaughtered. Jesus went there, and at least two of the Gospels specifically mentioned that he dispersed the animals, and that was what he did. And you can see early paintings of this, which I did not go into, which highlight all the animals running away, the doves flying away, and that was his main thing. Yes, he did, overturn the tables, but there's some question as to whether that emphasis on the money changers themselves was a little bit of tinkering by later church authorities who wanted to downplay. And again, I reference this book, Disciples by Keith Akers, for a lot more on this. He finds that there is an indication that this Jewish Christian group really was committed to vegetarianism, but that Paul was not, and thought that that was something that was going to get in the way of the adoption of Christianity. And he may very well have been right. So he did a lot of things to reform what we call primitive Christianity into the form that it wound up taking as the Catholic Church wound up being established. And part of that was in constraining the vegetarian impulse and doing things like saying, well, yeah, it's fine if you want to be pious and fast and stay away from meat. You're going to do it right within this particular period, for example, Lent. And that was something that the Waldensians, who claimed, which most historians agree is absurd, but the Waldensians did claim that they were a continuation of that early Jewish Christian church. So that's, I guess, probably a longer answer than you wanted. But I really, if you want more information on this and the way that this action in the temple fits in with a concept of Jesus as part of an explicitly pro-animal group, I refer you to Keith Akers in the book Disciples.
Thank you for the introduction of that book. I had never heard of it before, but I'm going to track it down.
Also,
Also,
well, let me know what you think.
Also in the Bible, there's no occasion on which Jesus ate meat. That's exactly where I was going with that. How about the bread and the fish?
Right. Well, that's again, we get into the question of which things from the different stories are more attested or less attested, and Keith Akers does go very much into that. I will say something I didn't have time to go into. People today, a lot of people who accept that animals feel pain still cleave to this concept that fish do not feel pain. Fish, even up to today, are considered a different kind of animal. And it may very well be that the Jewish Christians thought of fish not as being the animal. It may be that Jesus did eat fish, or it may be that that was a later interpolation. But I will point out that many of the Cathars that I mentioned, who the inner circle, who the inner elite, not all of them, but many of them, again, refused to eat animal products, but did not consider fish to be animals. So many of them ate fish. And there's also evidence that some of the Doukhobors, which was, I didn't have time to go into this huge sect of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in Russia that started back in the early 18th century. They were an all vegetarian group and to some extent vegan, but there are some reports of them, latter day reports of them also eating fish. So the fish versus animals thing is a great, rich area that I would love to see a whole other talk by somebody who knows more about it than I. But I don't have all the answers on that. But the short answer is that that the fish, Jesus eating fish, like to prove that he was back in full body. The thing that he did with the loaves and fishes, there's various issues of contention around that. The loaves and fishes part of the way that that's described in the original language could simply mean a kind of relish that was plant-based, but I don't think we have to necessarily go there for that, because it is possible that that the group that he was part of really did draw that dividing line between land animals and fish.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you
very much.
Darlene, do you have one?
Yes, thank you. This was totally fascinating, informative, evocative, and the cartoons, the drawings were amazing. So
Thank you.
whoa, just a multi-sensational. I was waiting for the music to come next because that would have just
Well,
completed it all.
be careful what you ask for.
Oh my gosh.
Go into my song Leftovers. That would be really something. But I appreciate that. I'm just going to say again, the content about Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet that I presented here, just a tiny smidgen of that is also part of my standard veg history tour. There's a lot more that I go on that has nothing to do with Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet, and there's other things that I say about them that I didn't have time for here. So I encourage everybody again to check out AmericanVegan.org and sign up for a veg history tour. If you thought this was interesting, there's a lot more that's specific to the early development of Philadelphia and the early development of the U.S. vegetarian movement, which did start unequivocally in Philadelphia. And it started after Benjamin Lay and Anthony Benezet were dead. But again, they were ahead of their time. So
I just had a quick question.
Yes.
One of the names that I was totally startled to see was Maximilian Weber, Max Weber.
right.
And to see his name attached to the Cathars. And I was wondering, I mean, he's the father of bureaucracy and has written a lot of books on religion as well. But I was wondering if you had any idea of any particular citation where Max Weber also talked about what you've been talking about, or at least about the Cathars.
Yeah, so that, again, that was taken from one article where people were referring to other commentators. I am not any kind of expert on Max Weber. I know that he did refer to them as the Albigenses in that citation.
Okay.
And, you know, this book was written, I think, in 1960. And the style of citing things was, it wasn't always like Max Weber says in this particular book or this particular treatise. Yeah, I will say the book was called Then and Now. Some people may be familiar with it. It was a book that was commissioned for a famous Quaker writer of the 20th century. Is his like 20th or 22nd anniversary as being on the American Friends Service Committee and
Right.
to run
Maybe
that.
Rufus Jones, or
Exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't Rufus Jones,
No,
but it was
I just read about it.
a contemporary of his. Point being, if you look up this book, this is a after they have an article specifically about this guy. They like the first article is about these roots that this writer is ascribing to the creation of the society by George Fox, and what different people have seen as being certain ideological threads being continued by that. So I got the book, not expecting to read that. I got the book because of Howard Brinton's article, Quakers and Animals, which also has a lot more stuff in it that I didn't go into, but it is also fascinating. So I'm sorry that I didn't like get an exact citation of that book into a slide. That would have been helpful. And now I know better how to do this presentation today that I should have known that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you so much, Vance. We're probably gonna close this out in the meeting house, but I'll leave the Zoom open in case people want to chat, and we will make a recording of this and share it with the group and others who may be interested in your amazing work. Thank you so much, Vance and Lee, for
Great.
bringing us this presentation today.
All
Deeply
right, thank you.
appreciated.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate being here. So if people have other questions, I'm happy to entertain them for another 7 minutes. And I know that this is my fault because I was not able to stick to the time that I had practiced and thought that I could fit everything into. But I do have 7 minutes available if anyone has any other questions or observations. Right.
Hi, Vance. Can you hear me?
Howdy. Yes.
Hi, Pam Page here, all the way from Florida.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me be a part. This has been fascinating. I'm sorry I missed part of it, and you may have already answered this question, but given that it's obvious that we need to reconnect with the earth, with the animals, to regain the peaceable kingdom that once was, that is so threatened. And I've been talking to Lee a little bit about this as well. It seems like we're now living in a time where we're even more disconnected because of social media, because of everybody's on the computer, and you can't even have dinner with somebody that they don't have their phone on the table. And it seems like their worlds or our worlds are getting even smaller. So what can we do to broaden that message in a world of, increasing isolation?
Right. I wish I had a pithy answer. Here's what we can do. I do think that I don't know if you're vegan. Obviously, my one size fits all solution to everything is go vegan. But I do think that it does help to have that grounding in where you're living your values, that helps to give a certain clarity to what you say when you interact with people. I will point out that most of these technologies and factors that isolate people are kind of double-edged swords, or double-edged books. No, they're not. We have so many terms in our culture that are based in violence. But I think you know what I mean, that social media, for example, certainly has driven isolation and helped take that snapshot and make it even smaller, and help people to just really have a tunnel vision about what they'll look at. But it also does, first of all, have the ability to bring people together in groups that have been marginalized, such as vegetarians and vegans, who have been considered just, this random few people here and there by mainstream society. And one of the things that I've found out, and that I'm trying to bring out through social media, through doing tours within the tourism industry in Philadelphia, is to get across to people that this is not some idea that started in the 1960s. This is not some idea that started in 1944 when the word vegan was coined. This is something that has been fundamental to, at the very least, Western culture. I just say that because I don't want to speak for the whole world and Eastern culture, but as we know, there are even much stronger traditions of nonviolence going further back in the culture of the East, so it's been much. I mean, it surprised me, even starting from 5-6 years ago when I started looking into this, and I thought that I had a pretty good sense of how what we consider these marginal groups were actually not as marginal as the mainstream society and mainstream meat-eating white male historians would have liked to believe. But even just, I continue to find things that just blow my mind with how much of this has been going on. And I think the more that we can get that across to people, that going vegan, being vegan, and living, in accordance with your own values and the place that you want to take up in the world, the more that we can get that out to people, that is possible, and that people have been doing it basically since there have been humans. I think that is a force for good, and social media and other things, other media that do have a deleterious effect in some ways, can also be used against themselves to spread that message.
Yeah, good answer.
Thank you. Are there? Okay. Great.
In another minute.
I haven't read all of the chat, so I don't know if I've been
No,
talking.
okay.
Yak.
Well, there's only a minute left, but I just wanted to thank you for how thought-provoking this has been for me. I caretake 10 acres, and I realize that I'm in the course of that, I'm I'm gardening, I'm killing things, we're beings that eat by killing something. I'm not equating animals with plants. I don't want to go there. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether if I'm ever to arrive at a point where I will neither hurt nor destroy, what am I going to have to do? Become breatharian? Maybe that's where humanity is headed when we're out of this adolescence. But
Yeah. Well,
some of the connections that you made for me were just thinking of the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm.
right.
The concept of ahimsa, the Jain movement, just trying to live in harmony. And I'll just wrap by saying that Quakerism speaks to this through at least two of the spices. One is the idea of simplicity, because if we can live our lifestyles more simply and harmoniously and avoid drawing down and hurting the commons, then we're partway there, I think. And the other one is equality, being able to see other beings on equal terms as ourselves, not just humans.
Yeah.
That was the theme at the recently concluded annual sessions Friday evening event in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago. So thank you. It's been very, very helpful. The thing I posted in chat was this internet pioneer Silas Rao is devoting himself now.
Oh yeah. I will
Yeah.
point out Salish Rao has done the tour and done the Veg History tour, and he liked it. So if you like
Wonderful.
Salish, you should be like Salish and
Yeah.
do the Veg History tour.
Yeah.
Also, I'm thinking just very quickly following up on you're talking about dealing with gardening and having so-called pests that you have to figure out what to do about. There are things on this tour that deal with that. The concept of veganic agriculture plays into that, and that ties in with Bronson Alcott's vegan commune that he started in 1843. But also Benjamin Lay himself went vegetarian directly, he said, as a result of killing a groundhog that was ravaging his garden, and then taking the groundhog and trying to dissuade other pests from entering his groundhog by dismembering the groundhog and posting its body parts around the borders of the garden. And then as soon as he got that done, he realized he was doing the same thing that had been done to Quakers and to the lower class in the English Revolution, that he was replicating, this trauma that his people historically had suffered. And that's what was the light bulb moment for Benjamin Lay. And I got to go very soon, but I will just say in terms of equality, I have to point out that Anthony Benezet, as far as historians have been able to determine, was the first white person in human history to unequivocally state that African Americans and white Americans were equal in their intellectual capacities. And he didn't just say it, he taught both populations. He taught Black kids for free, and he gave them the same tests, and he could see that there is variation within the populations, but it was basically the same. And he came out and he actually had a profound influence on Benjamin Franklin in getting that concept across. So for Benezet, it was very much about not trying to put yourself above, which of course was necessary for the institution of slavery, to have this excuse that they're just animals. They're not fully human like we are. Animals are not fully whatever we would consider worthwhile to justify being able to be in control of their own lives. So it does very much tie together. And I wish that I had not gone so far overboard, because I now have to wrap up. But I invite my email address is vance@americanvegan.org. So please feel free to follow up with me via email on any further questions that you have, or go to americanvegan.org, and right on the front page, you'll see a button for Veg History Tours, and you can come and we can talk. You don't have to do a Veg History Tour. Come into the American Vegan Center and talk to me there, because that's where I'm going to be very shortly. So,
And
yeah,
you didn't even mention everything in the tour that people will find out about suffrage. Women's suffrage is so much intertwined
yeah,
with your tour.
yeah,
And I think, right away at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the inspirational book, The Fearless Benjamin Lay by Marcus Rediker. How wonderful that has come out, because
yeah,
people got introduced to Benjamin Lay, realized that Sarah, the spouse of Benjamin Lay, was a minister. So this is like the Quakers had so much going on that I think Marcus Rediker is really bringing up to the surface now. So you're so well timed in so many intersections,
yeah.
Vance. Thank you so very much
Well,
for.
thank you. And I did not mean to slight the, women's liberation and
Oh,
all
it
that,
goes
but
on
that
and
is
on. Also,
definitely is very much tied in with the whole. I mean, I'll just say Pythagoras, the Jewish Christians, the Waldensians. There are many groups of vegetarians that, perhaps not coincidentally, ascribed equality between men and women as something that was fundamentally part of their perspective, and that was completely out of step with the patriarchal mainstream culture that we are still dealing with today. So
and also
there's more of that in there. Yeah. Sorry.
Sarah was also had dwarfism, as Benjamin
Right.
did, and
Yeah.
was a minister. And I think one more thing before you go is really important to bring out, is that Benjamin Lay, the return of Benjamin Lay is now a play. And it's
Right.
already happened in London. I am hoping it comes here and we can all go and see it, because the return of Benjamin Lay brought in an actor with dwarfism to accolades. The play is fabulous, and people now are saying in the disability rights community what this has done as well for liberation of the disability,
Yeah.
in people's minds, right? For that aspect too. So I just could go on and on. How many?
That's the thing. I could go on, and I have gone on, and so I'm now out of time. But I would love to follow up on all of those things. I will just say one thing that I forgot to mention. The return of Benjamin Lay is a great way of getting Benjamin Lay across to people. I would love to see a critical edition of Benjamin Lay's book, All Slave Keepers, that does where the whole
Yeah.
book, the little thing that I was doing with just those little
Oh,
paragraphs.
yeah.
There's so much there. It's so rich, but it's very hard for a lot of people to get into. Just, when you're looking at it, first of all, it's, if you look at the actual,
Ooh.
original edition, you have to read through these F's that are S's and so forth. But there's all these references that he makes that were, that may have been obvious to his intended audience, that are not as obvious today, but it's still a very rich and complex argument. If anybody has access to funding that could be available, Marcus Rediker is interested in helming that, if the money can be found to do that.
Okay.
So that's
Let's
something
work
that I would
together.
like to see. Okay.
Let's
All right.
we've got a project. We've got a future project, Vance.
Great. Yeah. All right.
Because
Love
we're
it.
starting a website on Benjamin Lay. It's called emergevalues.org. And
Right.
what's
I
up
didn't
there
even
now is
mention the
just
immersion.
placeholder stuff. That's not what you're going to see at all. We're just beginning.
Right.
But we're going to use a lot of nature photography,
Yeah.
and each word in emerge is going to have its own page. And so one of the things that we can flesh out right now is the project that you just outlined. So we will, yes, emergevalues.org, but don't look at what's there now, David, because that's not what's going to be there. But we are getting ready to do this. And so, Vance, I hope you'll play a role. I hope the American Vegan Center will play a role. Very exciting. Let's do it.
All right. I got to go, but I thank everybody again, and hope to see you soon at the American Vegan Center. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Bye-bye.
Well, if we're still going to be here for a few minutes after he leaves, looks like we are because of the meeting house. There is a presentation going on at 1 o'clock, so I'll be there in 7 minutes. There's a guy, a Quaker from Britain named Daniel Pink Dandelion, who was for
Oh,
30
yeah.
years active at Woodbrook.
Yeah.
He's giving a talk under the auspices of Barnegat and I think Camden meeting or someplace. But so if anybody's absolutely critically interested in that, I can try and make sure I get a copy of my Zoom link to you. But it starts in 5 minutes. Whatever. I just wondered. There's a couple people here who may not have said anything yet. And I just wondered if you, Freya, or is it Sierra, might have anything you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, I think this was wonderful. I just want to thank you, Lee, for inviting them to attend today. And I think this was just really an amazing way to hear about the history of vegetarianism, veganism, and the way in which it ties in, even in a spiritual and religious sense. I grew up vegetarian, never like had meat before, but people would always be like, oh, well, like, why would you want to be vegetarian? No, like, that's not very Christian because Jesus was eating meat. And I'd be like, well, it's not really an example of that. And they'd be like, no, but of course he was. So people were always, you know, kind of judging that or criticizing that. But this really gave a good stance of like, hey, this is how, you know, these values and these ethical beliefs align to the spiritual ones as well. So that was just really informative and I appreciate that. So thank you to everyone for, to Vance and to you as well, Lee, for inviting Vance to be here today and everyone to be here today, because that was really informative.
Well, I'd like to say that it's been a wonderful presentation we've had from Vance. A lot of new things we've learned and things to think about. I think at the core of this is that we're all looking for the best way we can live our lives and to live a life of peace. And we can take a lot of this information and just think about it, meditate on it, and see what we can do ourselves to make things more peaceful. There's the expression ahimsa, to live without doing harm. And along with that is the expression that Albert Schweitzer coined, reverence for life. And when you delve into reverence for life, it will open all kinds of possibilities. So I encourage everyone to do that. Well,
thank you, especially for, I'm sure you had an influence in the Vegan Center opening in Philadelphia. And I just think we're going to have to work on replacing the common understanding of the slogan that people refer to Philadelphia as, like, you know, instead of home of the Philly cheesesteak, it should be home of American veganism, you know. Well, Vance is producing a book and it'll have something of that to say.
That's great.
Lovely seeing you all today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you, everybody. Bye.